sound of creaking masts and tired, ragged breathing. 40 hours without sleep, the helmsman's eyes. They're not eyes anymore, just two bloody smudges. He stares at the horizon, where a dot is barely visible. A rich merchant ship, and the captain's voice, as hoarse as the creak of the rigging. They'll tire out before we do. He pulls out a small keg, pours a thick, almost black liquid into mugs, and looks into the empty eyes of his exhausted crew. This will put the fire back in you, he promises. But he left out the most important part. That fire would burn them from the inside out. Science is clear. After 36 hours without sleep, your cognitive functions are comparable to being intoxicated, with a blood alcohol level of 0.10%. After 40 hours, the brain begins to rebel. It forcibly shuts down for microseconds in what is called microsleep. The helmsman at the wheel is literally fighting his own brain, which is trying to knock him out. We've all heard of pirate cruelty, but their most terrifying weapon was aimed not at their enemies, but at themselves. This is the story of the horrifying price they paid to pursue their prey for days on end, defying nature's most fundamental law, the need for sleep. This is a story of a chemical rebellion against the human body. Imagine trying to fuel an antique clockwork mechanism with rocket fuel. It might generate incredible power for a short time, but the price is the complete burnout and destruction of the mechanism itself. In the next 10 minutes, we will dissect the diabolical recipe for this cocktail, which we'll call Devil's Grog. We will see how it turned men into berserkers and understand why the price they paid was worse than any prison sentence. And at the end, we'll separate the truth from the myth that has terrified sailors for centuries. Forget storms, the Kraken, or the Royal Navy. For a pirate in a long chase, the main enemy wasn't something outside, but something inside. Fatigue. The overwhelming desire to close your eyes, even for a minute. This very weakness cost them lost treasures, and to conquer it, they made a deal with the devil. This isn't just boredom, it's a form of sensory deprivation. The endless sea, the monotonous creak of the rigging, all of this creates an effect similar to highway hypnosis, where the brain starts to disconnect from the monotonous reality. The pirates weren't fighting fatigue, they were fighting the hypnotic trance of the open ocean. At the center of this struggle was always a mug, and what sloshed inside it only began with the grog we know. Yes, rum diluted with water. It disinfected stagnant water and boosted morale. The idea itself was stolen from the British Navy. In 1740, Admiral Edward Vernon, nicknamed Old Grog, ordered rum to be diluted to combat drunkenness. The pirates took this rule and twisted it beyond recognition. They added the main ingredient of their trade, black powder. The logic was primitive and ironclad. What makes cannons explode must also make blood explode. They didn't know chemistry, but they felt the effects of saltpeter or potassium nitrate, which makes up 75% of gunpowder. It truly did make the heart beat faster. But they weren't drinking a stimulant, they were drinking poison. The other components were sulfur, a known laxative, and charcoal. In large doses, saltpeter leads to kidney failure. Now, picture this. The salty air, the rocking ship. You're handed a wooden mug. Inside, a tart Swedish rum mixed with a grainy, bitter sulfuric dust. Could you drink it, knowing your share of the loot depended on it? This wasn't a matter of taste, it was a matter of desperation. It's like trying to start a stalled car by pouring a mixture of gasoline, sand, and acid into the tank. It might sputter a few times, but the engine will be irreversibly destroyed. But there's a theory that the most desperate captains went even further. In South America, which they raided, indigenous peoples had chewed coca leaves for centuries for stamina. Buccaneers of the late 17th century, like Bartholomew Sharp, who plundered Spanish colonies in Peru and Chile, had direct access to this plant. There is every reason to believe that crushed coca leaves became the third secret ingredient of their devilish drink. And here's the result. Rum is a depressant, gunpowder is a toxic pseudo-stimulant, coca is a powerful euphoriant. In one mug, they didn't just add up, they multiplied, creating a chemical storm in the body. A veritable civil war began inside the pirate. Alcohol screamed at the nervous system. Hit the brakes! The stimulants roared back. Hit the gas! His body became a battlefield between two opposing commands. First came a deceptive warmth. The rum relaxed cramped muscles and dulled the pain of torn calluses. And then, a sharp jolt to the chest. The heart exploded with saltpeter. The world narrowed to a single point on the horizon. Fatigue didn't just disappear. It was as if it had never existed. A normal resting pulse is 60, maybe 100 beats per minute. This cocktail revved the heart to 150, even 180. That's the pulse of a sprinter at peak exertion. But the pirate had to endure this state for hours, turning his heart into a motor, wearing itself out at its limit. This is a berserker state. The pupils are dilated to their maximum to let in more light. Reactions are sharpened to an animalistic level. The sense of fear is completely atrophied. He feels no pain, doesn't notice cuts. This isn't bravery, it's the complete shutdown of the self-preservation instinct. The brain operates on a single program: move, attack, win. Imagine a car with all the dashboard sensors disabled, the engine temperature gauge, the oil level sensor, the brake lights. The car is moving, but the driver has no idea it's about to explode. The pirate became such a machine, hurtling towards self-destruction. Now, you're on the merchant ship. You see a boarding party rushing toward you. But these are not just men. Their eyes burn with a mad fire. They scream, and they don't react to wounds. They move like wind-up dolls, possessed by a single idea. You're not fighting pirates. You're fighting monsters created by their own chemistry. Historians still debate what sent Norse berserkers into their battle trance, mushrooms or rituals. Pirates may have accidentally found a chemical key to the same state, turning themselves into the Caribbean berserkers of the 18th century. But they weren't invincible. It was a deception. Yes, their brute force and aggression were off the charts, but fine motor skills, tactical thinking, and shooting accuracy, all that was shot to hell. Stimulants cause hand tremors. Reloading and accurately firing a flintlock pistol, a task requiring a calm and steady hand, became nearly impossible for them. They were effective as a battering ram, but not as a scalpel. That's why they relied on cold steel and sheer momentum. This superhuman state could last for 10, 12, even 15 hours. They would win, seize the ship, divide the spoils. But for every hour of this artificial paradise, their nervous system was already writing them a bill. The chemical tide that carried them on its crest would recede, leaving behind only a depleted, ravaged nervous system, vulnerable to every fear and pain. It was the worst hangover in human history, multiplied by 10. The heart, revved up by saltpeter, now didn't beat but stumbled through fits of arrhythmia. The stomach, burned by sulfur and charcoal, was turned inside out from chemical burns to its lining. The kidneys screamed from the overload, trying to filter the poison, and every muscle, just an hour ago taut as a string, now burned with a dull, aching pain. The body transformed from a weapon into a personal prison. But the physical pain was just the prelude. The truly terrifying part began in the mind. The brain, scorched by stimulants and deprived of sleep, started a war with reality. The creak of a mast became a sinister whisper. A shadow from a sail in the corner of the eye became a figure with a knife. A crewmate simply sharpening his blade seemed like a conspirator preparing to strike from behind. The ship turned from a home into a floating torture chamber full of enemies. This isn't fiction. It's a classic symptom of sleep deprivation psychosis. The brain, desperate for dreams, begins to play them out while awake, mixing nightmares with reality. Let's create a scale of command disintegration. Physical exhaustion, 7 out of 10. Hallucinations, 9 out of 10. Level of mutual distrust, 10 out of 10. The probability of a mutiny over a misplaced glance was off the charts. Military psychologists call this a loss of unit cohesion. When soldiers stop trusting each other, the unit becomes just an armed mob. The Devil's Grog was a chemical weapon aimed at destroying the pirates' greatest asset, their crew. And there was only one way to end this agony: a new dose. The cocktail became both poison and cure, closing a monstrous circle. Each dose was a loan of energy taken from one's own body, but the interest on that loan grew exponentially. Very soon, a pirate wasn't drinking to become a berserker. He was drinking just to feel human again, to postpone the inevitable reckoning. They turned friends into enemies. They burned out their bodies. They willingly plunged into a hell of paranoia. The answer lies not in psychology, but in brain chemistry. This volatile mixture hit two targets precisely. It disabled the brakes in the prefrontal cortex, the center of reason, while simultaneously flooring the gas pedal in the amygdala, the center of fear and aggression. The result was the perfect chemical recipe for creating an impulsive, paranoid maniac on a confined vessel. Imagine the brain as a dashboard with three main gauges: adrenaline, the fight-or-flight system; dopamine, the reward and motivation center; serotonin, the regulator of calmness. Devil's Grog didn't just push the needles of these gauges into the red zone, it poured acid all over the dashboard. After such a tune-up, the gauges didn't just return to normal, they burned out forever. Irreversible damage to neural pathways occurred. First, the nitrates from the gunpowder triggered a fire alarm. This is called activating the sympathetic nervous system. The heart beats faster, blood rushes to the muscles, and breathing quickens. The body thinks it's in mortal danger and mobilizes all reserves. It's like having a siren blaring non-stop in your house. For the first 5 minutes, you're ready for a fight. After an hour, you start to lose your mind. After 12 hours, your nervous system simply burns out from the constant stress. Second, if the cocktail contained coca, another mechanism came into play. Coca leaves block the reuptake of dopamine, the pleasure molecule. Imagine dopamine is water filling a bathtub. Normally, when it's full, a drain opens to remove the excess. Coca plugged that drain completely. The tub overflowed, causing euphoria and a feeling of omnipotence, but eventually, the entire system was flooded and broke down. The constant bombardment of adrenaline and dopamine literally burned out the receptors. The brain stopped responding to them. Eventually, to feel anything at all, the pirate needed an ever-increasing dose, and without the drug, the world became gray, joyless, and full of anxiety. This process is called receptor downregulation. The brain, trying to save itself from this chemical screaming, literally plugs its ears. It physically removes some of its dopamine receptors from its surface. This isn't a metaphor, it's a real, irreversible change in the brain's architecture. The pirate was breaking his own mind with his own hands. But history is always more complex than legend. The idea of mixing gunpowder with alcohol is not a fabrication. In 1678, Alexandre Exquemelin, a surgeon who served with the pirate Henry Morgan, described it in his book, The Buccaneers of America. He saw freebooters like Francois L'Olonnais mix brandy with gunpowder before an attack. It was a ritual, a test of toughness, and a way to show their fearlessness. Exquemelin was an eyewitness, but he was also a showman, and his book was a bestseller where drama was valued as much as facts. Modern historians are skeptical. First, gunpowder is poison. Second, coca leaves. They were common in South America, but not in the Caribbean, where most pirates of the Golden Age operated. Getting them would have been difficult and expensive. Yes, the Spanish Silver Fleet sailed from Peru through the Caribbean to Spain. Theoretically, pirates could have captured such a cargo, but it would have been a rare, exotic prize, not a regular ingredient. It would be like a modern soldier trying to create a stimulant from a random drug found in an enemy's first aid kit. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. The practice of mixing gunpowder with alcohol probably existed, but it was more of a ritual than a systematic doping regimen. And the story of the miraculous cocktail was a myth that the pirates themselves perpetuated. After all, there's nothing more advantageous than a rumor that your crew consists of tireless demons who know no pain or fatigue. It's like the Jolly Roger. The flag itself did no harm, but the sight of it made merchant captains surrender without a fight. The legend of the Devil's Grog was the same kind of weapon, a chemical Jolly Roger that paralyzed the enemy's will before the boarding even began. But this story, it's not just a tall tale from the past. It's an extreme example of 3 timeless rules of survival. First, a limit is a safety feature, not an enemy. Fatigue is the check engine light on your body's dashboard. You can cover it with tape and keep driving, but the engine will still blow up. Second, the price of a quick fix is always higher. Any chemical shortcut to energy is like taking out a payday loan at 1,000% interest from your own nervous system. Today, you gain power, but tomorrow, you surrender your mind as payment. And third, most importantly, psychology always beats chemistry. The pirates' most powerful weapon wasn't a cocktail, but the terror they inspired. Edward Teach, Blackbeard. He wove lit fuses into his beard not to see better in the dark, but to look like a demon risen from hell. His reputation was so monstrous that most ships lowered their flags without a single shot being fired. His image was his main weapon, not some drink. So what was it really? A real performance-enhancing drug that granted superhuman strength, or a brilliant psychological trick that made enemies surrender without a fight? Write just one word in the comments. Doping, if you believe in the power of the recipe, or myth if you think it was a clever fabrication.